All right, I'm ready to start up. What I want to do first is I want to mention just a couple things to you. First, I'm going to start probably showing a little bit more of this in Notepad++, not because it's a better editor, but it's easier, I think, for you to see in Notepad++, because it's not, stuff isn't, for lack of better words, kind of all over the screen. All right. And what I'd like to do is fairly quickly go over what we've done thus far, okay, in this file. So just a little bit of review. You should know by now that line 1 is that doc type statement. And what line 1 does, for lack of better words, is it lets the system know that this is an HTML5 document. All right? HTML, again, is a tag-based language, meaning that it has, most tags have a beginning tag and an ending tag. All right, one thing you may or may not have noticed when you are in Visual Studio Code, that if you come in, and I'm just going back in here for a second just to show you this, but if I go in, for example, to index.html and I click on my header tag, what the system automatically does is well, it's not doing it now, of course, but it will show you what maps up with it. All right. And you probably have already noticed that when you create a beginning tag, it creates the end tag for you, all right, which is just a little nicety. All right, so our HTML tag, again, we want this to validate, so language equals English. This is our head tag, and again, as you already have heard, with the head tag, this stuff does not appear on screen. All right, so what do we have in here? We've got a thing first that says that our character set is Unicode. All right, UTF 8-bit character set. And the character set, again, is the way that the stuff is converted from the ABC, etc., that we type into the computer into the zeros and ones that the computer can understand. All right, then we've got our viewport, and this basically, it's not that important now, but when we start talking in about chapters 7 and 8 about making stuff responsive, you may or may not have noticed this, but if you look right, if you look up on the screen here, and I go out to the actual travistritt.com, all right, it's responsive. You see that? And notice that now this thing broke down so that instead of, for example, this and this and this, if it's full screen, that's 3 wide. As it gets smaller, it goes to 2 wide, then it goes to 1 wide. That's a responsive type of web design. Now, it's kind of a good news, bad news situation in that there were literally millions of websites around before anybody even thought about responsive design, because people typically looked at them in a desktop or a laptop. All right. So when we start talking about responsive design, which we will in a few weeks, there's really 2 things you can do. You can, and what a lot of places did was they already had a non-responsive website that was designed for desktops and laptops. So they built a new copy of their website just for smaller devices. All right. What some places did was they went back to the beginning, and you're really better off building for a smaller device first, because it's much easier to expand than it is to contract. But you're going to learn all that stuff as we go on. Okay, so then we've got a couple more meta tags, and again, these 2 things that you see here, they're both done for search engine optimization. Okay, we've got the description that typically goes along with if somebody is looking for Travis Tritt, and let's say they got this website, that's what they would find. That's what they would get underneath the URL. That would be the description. And the keywords. And as I mentioned before, and I don't know how good a job I did with this, but when you go and you enter a website into different search engines, Yahoo, Bing, Google, etc., they do what's called spider the website, which means they go through every page of the website. They look for bad content. I mean, you shouldn't have curse words, etc., that kind of stuff. But one of the things that they look for is, okay, if I put these things in here for my content, is that the actual content? All right, and there's certain sites. For instance, I've got a friend of mine who's got a pet sitting service. He was a salesman for years. He retired, but he got bored and he started getting fat. So he started his own pet sitting service, and he walks pets. He didn't understand why his website wasn't very high on the list, but the keywords that he had in there weren't very good. So I said, let's go out and look at some of the ones that are out there and look at their keywords and copy them. That's not cheating. Those are just keywords. All right? So then we've got our title. And again, I think I mentioned this before, but just in case I did not, the order in which you put these totally doesn't matter except for these two lines right there. Okay, they have to be in that order. Normalize has to come before styles. But some people like their link tags first, etc. I don't know. I was just kind of taught, and most of the sites I see put the meta tags first, then the title, then the links. It's not that you have to do it that way. If for some reason you feel inclined that you want the title first, then put the title first. I think it's much easier as you begin your programming journey to develop some kind of a style and stick to it. And to be honest with you, even a bad style is better than no style at all. And I don't mean that your style is bad, but even a bad style is a consistent style. All right? So this was the title again. That title appears up here in our tab, okay? And sometimes it won't even show unless you put your mouse over it. This is kind of long. If I had changed that instead of Travis Tridholm to just home, it probably would have all shown along with the picture. All right? Then this was the favicon that we added yesterday. All right? And hopefully no one had any problems adding that favicon, creating it, and adding it. All right? And then we had our normalize file, and we had our styles file. Remember that normalize is the one that we went and actually copied from that site. And what that did was it basically reset most of our settings at the beginning. All right? And then the styles.css is the one that we're creating. Okay? And remember, and now I'm looking at this, that should say images. Nope, that's image.ping. This should say images. All right? You know, we've already found out this morning, and I'm not picking on him. Gabriel just came in and asked, and he had an S missing from one of his file names. Everybody does it. Now, right here, this is a system setting. This is telling the system that, hey, I'm using a ping image. If I put images in there instead of image, it wouldn't work correctly because it would think it's supposed to look in my images directory, and that's not for a system setting. However, the actual file is in images because that's where I save the favicon. So it's very, very easy to get hung up on some kind of a mistake. All right, we all do it. If you haven't done it yet, you'll do it sooner or later. All right. Again, then we've got our normalize and our CSS. Then I just decided to show you literally creating a header section. Again, the header section is in here. Header is an HTML5 tag. It's a new tag. It's a semantic tag. Before this, what most people used to do, instead of doing this, and I'm going to remove it right away, but they'd come in and they'd say div ID equals header, like that, and then down here it would just end the div. And there's nothing wrong with doing that, but it's not as semantic. Div just means it's a general word. All right? And a lot of people, when they did that, didn't even give it an ID or gave it an ID that wasn't header. They might have given it an ID that, you know, wasn't that specific or didn't do that good a job of explaining things. So in our header section, what do we have? We have our navigation section, and don't worry, I was playing around with this yesterday. So if mine looks a little different than yours, don't do anything with yours, okay? But so what do we have in there? We've got an unordered list right now. That unordered list was pretty ugly when it rendered, and you saw that. We're going to do some work on that today. But what the takeaway I want you to get is, again, this is an unordered list, which means that by default it's going to have the little what's called a disk there, which is a colored in circle. All right. And it's also, for every one of these, we're setting up an anchor tag. You should know by now, it should make sense to you that the word home, the word music, the word tour, the word store, and the words fan club, those are all going to be hyperlinked. All right. And when you click on one of those links, this is where you're going, is to this file. We did all that yesterday. So that, again, should make sense. Notice that the A tag is another one of these tags. There's the beginning, there's the end. There's the beginning, there's the end. If you forget an ending tag, all right, if you forget an ending tag, what can happen, like the worst one to forget, really, when you think about it, would probably be this one. All right, I'm just going to remove it for a second. All right, and then, oops. Well, I guess I thought I saved this, but I guess I didn't, so that's fine. I'll just throw this on the desktop. And if I go run this, now it's not going to have the, well, I do, okay. But see all the underlines? You're going to do that. I do that. All right, and it's pretty easy to figure out, okay, someplace in here, I've got a tab that I shouldn't have. And again, I was playing with this stuff. That's why mine looks a little bit different than yours. Don't worry about it. So I just come back in here and I add that back again. Oops. All right. Okay. Then we also put an H1 tag in there. And the main reason was just so that when we were on each page, we knew what page we were on. That was it. All right. And then I had you go out to lipsim.com or whatever it was and put in a couple paragraphs. Okay. You may have put in more paragraphs than that. You may have put in less. Now, you don't have to change this. I changed this, and the only reason that I did was I went out to the official site. And what they had in their footer was copyright 2020 Great Day Touring. All right, and Great Day is part of one of the songs that he sings, okay? And that's what they had, was they had all of this stuff up till right here. Okay? But they didn't have JPS design, it was some other person .design. So I just put mine in there. Yours is fine the way it is. All right. So again, we had a header, and then we had a footer. Now, what most people do, you can do this, you don't have to. But what most people do then is in their actual area in the body that's not a header and not a footer, is they come in here and they put in, oops, a main tag. Because this is basically signifying our main content. So I start it right here. I'm going to tab over one, and I end it right here. All right. Again, you don't have to do that, but I'm showing you semantically the way these things are typically set up. All right. You're going to notice that if I save that and I run it again, it's going to look exactly the same as it did before. There's no difference. Again, these semantic tags are just meant so it's clearer for people to look at it to see where something starts and ends, and the next thing starts and ends. All right? Then finally, we went in, and just so we had a little bit of stuff that we did here, okay, the body we set to green, the color we set to white. Now, I didn't do this yesterday, but I'm going to do a Control-A, Control-C, all right, because I told you yesterday I was going to do this, and then I didn't do it. Do what? Well, HTML validator. All right, there is the W3 markup service, because I don't remember what that is, and I don't really care. But I'm pasting in what we had, and I'm going to check it. It says that I've got an error. Name character reference, it says in line 74. Oh, look at it. After the ampersand copy, I didn't put a semicolon after that. I missed that. All right, so go down to line 74, ampersand copy. Watch on the screen, if you would, to see where it says ampersand copy. You may or may not be able to tell. It became very, very much italicized after I did that. All right, so I'm going to save. Go back to Control A, Control C. Go back to here. Remove what was in there, put the new stuff in. And it says everything was fine. So we should have, all right, a syntactically correct document thus far. Does that make sense to everybody? Now, I'm not trying to waste your time spending 10 or 15 minutes on this, but I want to make sure we're all at the same starting point, for example. Now, so what we've done so far, you don't have to do this, but if you're confused on anything that we've done, you might want to go out to the w3schools.com/HTML site, because when you look at this, there's a heck of a lot more that we haven't covered yet. All right? But the beginning stuff we have started to cover. And today, we're going to do some of the beginning stuff in CSS because we're going to go over Chapter 4. And I want to mention to you, lastly, before we start on Chapter 4, which we're going to do right now, but lastly, before we do that, this is the document right there. That's the document that they had at the end of Chapter 3. There's nothing at all wrong with it. It works. It has virtually no CSS in it whatsoever. Now you might look at that and go, oh, it does, Jeff. This is italicized. That's because they used one of the HTML5 address tags. That's what did it. All right. By the end of this chapter, they go back and they convert this right here into this. Now, what's the difference? Well, hopefully you can look at it and see some of the differences. First of all, they've done what's known as kind of wrapping the text around the image. Previously, it was down below it. All right? They've gone and they've done some work with the different colorings in here. All right, they added this paragraph, this section here, looking for a unique gift, and they also went and took the footer and they right justified it. All right, so that's some of the stuff they're going to do. Again, you're all smart enough to realize this. We're going to just start to hit some of the beginning points in here. Last night, that Colt Steele, the guy I showed you his video the other day, he had a thing online, and I thought, okay, I got sent it and said, yeah, you want to join? I guess people sent him questions and he answered them. He's a very different dude. We're all different, and I get that. But I guess he had to put his dog down, and he went off for 5 minutes on how he had to put his dog down, which, I feel bad for him. But he's like, but I still have my cats, and then he brought one of his cats out, and I'm like, I don't know if I really want to watch this. But it was interesting. And the reason I'm telling you that is one of the people had submitted questions beforehand, and one of them was, what do you want to learn more about? And he said, I consider myself to be good with CSS, but there's so many features that if I want to use them, I got to go online and find how somebody else has done it, copy it, make some changes to it so it becomes mine. And he said, I wish that's how you're going to feel about everything. All right? You're not going to be able to learn everything. Even if you've got a photographic memory, there's just too much to learn. And once you say, okay, I got it all now, then something else is going to be added. That's just the way that this field works. All right? Okay, so I'm going to go back and start then on Chapter 4. All right? As you can see in here, as far as what's in here, we get a little intro to CSS. All right? Then we talk about measurements and colors. I'm going to give you in here a lot of recommendations. Whether you follow those recommendations or not typically is up to you. But there's what are known as ways of doing things and good ways of doing things. And I'm going to try to tell you the, quote, good ways of doing things. All right? Then we'll talk about selectors. This part that's in here, this is the hardest part of the chapter, by far. And again, the idea is it's not so much that you have to memorize this information, but it's important that you know where to look for it. All right? And I'm not even saying that W3 Schools is the best or the only place. It's probably the most intuitive place to go and look for things. And what I like about it is not only do they give you an explanation, but almost always they give you an example. That's what I'm looking for. All right? After we get done with that, we'll talk about what cascading actually means in here, talk about some stuff with text, and then, again, that's the page I showed you previously. All right? So, it says there's 3 ways that you can provide CSS styles for a web page. So let's take a look at all 3. All right? The first way that they show here is the best way. It's the way that I showed you. And it's not that it's the best way because it's the way I showed you. It's the best way because you are putting your CSS in an external file. So what you're doing is you are segregating the CSS from the HTML. And then later, when we get into JavaScript, we'll notice that there's 3 ways of doing that. And the best way of doing that is to put the JavaScript in its own file and segregate that away from the HTML and the CSS. All right? Some people don't do that. Some people do it most of the time, but I had to cheat here, and etc. Now, so when you do that, again, you've seen this already. You must link this. The rel here means relationship. So link, the relationship, meaning it's a style sheet. This is where that style sheet lives. And there are other ways of bringing in style sheets other than the way I'm showing you. This is the way you typically bring in a style sheet if the style sheet is yours and it's in your project. You with me? But you might go to work for a company. They might have a bunch of their own style sheets and they want you to use those. Then you typically don't link those. You do what's called import those. And I think that's shown in the chapter here. We'll see. Now, so I always say the way to look at it is this. The good news about doing this, you've already seen this. This way right here, when you go in and you do it like we said, when you do it with an external style sheet, it's site-wide. Any pages on the site that you include this link now have that availability. You saw that. I'm not going to bring it up, but in arttravistritt.com. You already saw that. Now, as soon as we did that and made those changes and linked that into every page was green with white writing. Okay? All right. Sometimes you've got something special you want to just put on a page. It's got to just go on this page and you don't want it on every page. So what some people do is they create what's called internal CSS. So the first one was external CSS. This is internal CSS. It goes in your head section, all right, and it goes in between what are called style tags, all right. Is there an advantage to doing this? I just told you. If you want to put in something for a certain page. Now, if you do a good job when you set your stuff up of naming things, we're going to start to get into that today, with IDs and classes, you probably never need to use this. All right, but some people do. In fact, I know of some developers who use this quite a bit. All right, it has to be between style tags, and there's all sorts of stuff you can put in here. Hopefully, when you look at this, this makes sense to you, but I'm going to mention it anyway. This says that in the body of this particular document, you want to use the Arial font. If for some reason you don't have the Arial font on this machine, you will use the Helvetica font. If by some chance you don't have Arial and you don't have Helvetica, use whatever, and every computer has at least one serif font and one sans serif font. We're going to look at fonts in this chapter. All right? And there's a lot of other things that you can do. One of the things I thought of showing you today, and I was even going to bring it in, then I thought, I don't want to confuse people. But you may or may not have heard of this. Google's got their own fonts. Fonts.google.com. The problem is you only have a limited number of fonts on most machines. So Google came in, and now look, it's right under 1,000. When I taught this last year, I think it was 854 then. So they've come up with what? 145 since then. Okay? And there are other ones too. There are font families you can buy. There's other packages that you can use. We will get into this later, but notice with all these, they show you an example of what it looks like. and what's kind of cool is if you choose one, they show you sometimes you want paired fonts, you want some of the stuff, maybe your headings in this font, then what font goes well with that. All right, which is kind of nice. And what it's basically going to give you is one, or if you use two of them, two different links that you put in to your head section. All right, and then when you use it, you're just literally going to come in then when you use it and do something along the lines of this. Font family, so for instance, a popular one is Roboto. A lot of people use that. Okay? All right. And then we've got a font size, which says 100%. And this says for H1, we want the font size of that to be 250%. So the font size for our H1 should be 2.5 times the size of all of our other fonts. That's what it's saying. All right? And then finally, you can do something like this. This is inline CSS. External, meaning it's in another file. Internal, meaning that it is in style tags in the head section. And inline, which means you put it right in an element itself. This is considered the poorest way of doing this because now you are actually putting CSS right into your HTML tags. And that's considered, the bad way of doing it. I've said this before. This isn't funny. It's no joke. There are no HTML and CSS police. If you do it that way, no one's going to say anything. All right? The only people who might are other people who work on the site or whatever. They might say something. I have absolutely no idea. All right? Now, they call them external, embedded, and inline. What they call embedded, I have always called internal. All right? Okay, ways of providing browser compatibility. The stuff that's shown here, I'm on page 127. For lack of better words, it's old. This is mainly for IE8 and IE9. All right? And there are still people out there that use Internet Explorer 8 and 9, and some even earlier. All right? And what they have here is literally what's called an HTML shiv. What that does is it says if you've got an older version of a browser, it's going to look at a lot of these new tags and it's not going to understand what they are. So it's going to create them or use them as though they're not block level. Remember there was block level where there's a line before and after them and there were inline. It's going to treat them as inline tags because it doesn't know what they are. This shiv says, hey, even if you don't know what they are, treat them like block level anyway. For lack of better words, that's what it does. Now, a lot of people don't even use that anymore. But you can go and read it if you don't like my explanation, but it's pretty much says the same thing. All right? This we've already looked at. Again, this is the website. I guess that was where it was. On this page here, that's got the normalized.css. Okay? And how to download it, we've already done that, so I don't think it pays to go back and talk about that. So let's get into measurements first. All right. When you look at the first two measurements in this chart, those being pixels and points, those are referred to as exact units of measurement. Okay? If you can help it, because we want to think responsive design from the get-go, don't use those. It doesn't mean that it's illegal to use them, but it's recommended that you don't. Sometimes to not use them, you've got to do a little bit of math. You're like, oh God, I hate math. It's not hard math. All right? For instance, with M's and Rems down here and percentages, these are the recommended ones to use. All right? And with all of these, what happens is there are 16 pixels equals 1M. So in the past, where you would say something would be 16 pixels in size, you typically say 1M or 1 rem right now. All right? And percentages are used a lot if you want to set something up. So for instance, if I wanted all of my images to take up 100% of the screen, I might, for my images, I might say width 100% type of an idea. If I realize that on my screen, let's say that I want, looking at this one, right, well, and Travis is here. See that? That's 3 across. Well, what if it turned out this was a little bit wider and it was only giving me 2 across and it was putting the next one down here, which is what it would do by default. Then I could come in here and I could say take these and maybe instead of making them the size there, maybe make them 85% for the width, and then they would fit. What you're going to find as we go through here is width is the more important of the two. More important than height. In fact, a lot of times when you scale an image, if you scale the width, the height goes along for the ride, for lack of better words. All right, so M's and Rems. 1 M is equal to the font size of the current font. Rems. 1 rem is equal to the font size of the root element. Well, what the heck does that mean? All right. I have typically always used M's. Okay? And very rarely, if ever, used rems. And I was online yesterday, and I was reading, and you could find articles that says, use rems, never M's. And you can find articles that say, use M's, never rems. It's which basically it's a feeling type of thing. And it says here, 1 M is equal to the font size of the current font. What that means is it's based on wherever it's located in the document. So, if I have, for example, if I have a list item, okay, then that list item, the size of it by default is going to be whatever size the UL or unordered list tag was. If that wasn't set, it goes and sees what that's inside of, and it eventually finds something. On the other hand, with a rem, it's equal to the font size for the root element. It goes to the very top, and it says, what's that font size? Now, you might have heard that and go, clear as mud. So I went out yesterday and I started looking online, and I found this, and I'll provide a link to it for you later. All right, I'll make sure I have a link for send it out to everybody. And it's just called Confused About Rem and M. Okay, and it does a little better job of going through that. It's not real long. I mean, some of the stuff that you read in here, it's so dry, you get done, and now I'm more confused than I was when I started. Right? That's, of course, not what I'd want. All right. But what you're going to find is you also can mix. You can use percentages, rems, and M's. Many sites still use pixels. So if I wanted to say that something was 20 pixels, and I didn't want to use pixels, I'd say 20 divided by 16, which is 1 1/4, 1.25. So 20 pixels equals 1.25 M's or rems. Does that make sense to everyone? All right. Now, if you have a test, and your test, the stuff that you do in there works, and you haven't been told to use M's or rems or whatever, and you use whatever you want and it works, that's more important. All right? All right. And you're going to see this again, too. Now, they talk next about colors. We've looked at colors a little bit. You notice I used green and white yesterday. It says here 16 descriptive color names. Guess what? There are more than that. I don't know how many there are. But there's things like goldenrod, and there's other ones that the system will recognize. All right? And you can put those in. If you're not sure, again, hopefully you saw this, and I'm going to go back again into here, but where are we? Okay, that's one of the reasons I like Visual Studio Code is when you put that in, it shows it to you. All right, it shows you what that green is going to look like, what that white is going to look like, etc. All right. And there's other ways of doing it. So one is to just give it a color name. One is to put RGB in front of it. RGB, I may have mentioned this the other day, I may not have, red, green, blue. And when you do that, you can use percentages, as they show here. 100% is 255. 255 is based off the ASCII or American Standard Code for Information Interchange character set, which is the character set we had before Unicode. All right? And 255, like they show right there, is total saturation. 0 is no saturation. Does that make sense? So you put in a number, if you do it this way, between 0 and 255. All right? For instance, total saturation, so if you wanted the page to be white, would be 255, 255, 255. If you wanted the whole page to be black, it would be 0, 0, 0. All right? That kind of thing. And you can mix these. You can do this any way you want to. I don't think it'll work if you use colors and percentages. I've never tried that. All right? And to be honest with you, I don't ever use percentages. Now, you may have known this already. You may not have. But, you can go out there and you can say, for example, there are thousands of color pickers out there that you can use when you want to pick out a color. Not only that, you can add extensions to Google Chrome, and one of Google Chrome's extensions is a color picker. Or let's say that I wanted a different kind of green. So I could type in here green Hex Code. And it'll show me some of the ones. So this is forest green, this is lime green. Some of the ones that are in here, it looks like this one might have a table. All right? So you can do stuff like that if you want to. And the third way of doing it, and I showed you this yesterday, is to use what's called a hex code. Putting a pound sign or a hashtag, whatever you want to call that, at the beginning says this is a hex code. Now, they'll say this in the book someplace, but not right away. I think you'd all agree that's the same thing 6 times. FF, FF, FF. When you've got something that repeats like that, you only need 3 of them. So to say pound FFFFFF is the same thing as saying pound FFF. Make sense? But you can only do that a limited amount of time. So a lot of developers always put all 6 values in there. All right. And they're showing an example here. So the body says the background color will be, that's this yellowish or whatever you would consider that to be. That's this. So there's a total saturation of red. There's a total saturation of green. And an almost total saturation of blue. Again, you know this as well as I do. Had this been FFFFFF, that'd be white. So, it's very easy to sit and play with this stuff. All right? And you can also, let's face it, you can go out and Google anything, right? And there are sites out there that will tell you what colors go well with what other colors. So if you, let's just say that you go and you work for a company and they've got a logo that's a certain color. You might want to build the website around that logo color. You may not. All right, it just depends. It's interesting because I had found a site and they put it up and I on that websites that suck.com that I showed you. And it was interesting because it was for a cigar store. And the background was cigar paper. That, pardon my French, but it's the same color as crap. And that's what it looked like in the background because they had like little slits in it and whatever. It looked really bad. But it was out there for a long time, and then they finally changed it. All right? I don't think that was a good use of color, personally. All right. So this is 00F. So notice there's only 3 of them. No red, no green, total saturation of blue, which gives you that. All right? Now, they have some accessibility guidelines in here. It's the stuff I mentioned to you already. Visually impaired. Dark text on a light background is easier to read. Black type on a white background is the easiest to read. That's the good news. Bad news is it's probably the most blah looking. All right, whether that's right, wrong, good, bad, doesn't really matter. All right, when you look at the color specifications, there's one more thing that you can add. All right, so for example, there's RGBA. It's like, what the heck is A? A is what's called alpha. You put in a number, if you use it, between 0 and 1. 0 is total absence. 1 is total presence. Look on the screen. Hopefully this comes through. This looks kind of faded, for lack of better words. Sometimes you want that effect in a website. then you're working with opacity or the alpha value. Right? That's how it's used. Do you ever have to use it? No. All right, but sometimes you want to use that for effect. All right. So they're showing all of them there, okay? And there's RGBA. There's also something that's called HSL, which is another way that you can do colors. And it's hue, H-U-E, saturation, and light. It's just yet another way that you can do colors. And just like the RGB has an alpha or opacity component, the HSL has a capacity, or I'm sorry, an opacity component. All right. I mean, this is just me, especially when you're first starting. You're best off using hex codes and the built-in colors. If you don't agree with that, then you do it the way you want to do it. You know, I always say this to people, and I'm sure that Angie will probably tell you that she's heard this before, and that is, you're starting on the road, so to speak. You should be programming for readability, for understandability more than anything else on your part. Sometimes you may write some code, and you might write 4 or 5 lines, and then later find out, oh, I could have done that in 1 line. But the 4 or 5 lines make total sense to you. Then do it that way. I want it to make total sense to you. You can always go back and learn shortcuts later. All right? Okay. So here's the next part. This is the meat and potatoes, so to speak, of this chapter. All right? If I want to be able to set everything on a web page, everything, you can use the asterisk. Okay? Now, you saw that normalize, right? Okay? It used to be when people would make up their own normalize, they would write something like this, asterisk, and they would say like margin, 0, padding, 0. And why? Because that turned off the margin and the padding for the entire document. Does that make sense? But this started getting pretty big, so people made reset files and normalize files. You'll still see this sometimes. People will have certain things that maybe is not in the normalized file, or they don't have a normalized file, or there's something in the normalized file that they don't like the way that it's set. And they'll still go in and do it that way. All right? Here is by type. This is what we've done so far. So this, you know, for example, I just showed you a main. All right? If I put this in the main that we had for the Travis Tritt site, I'd now have a box, a 2-pixel solid black box around those paragraphs that are in main. If that's what I wanted to do, I could do it. Not a problem. All right. It would also have 1M or 16 pixels of padding. Okay. Now, I'm going to date myself right here, but am I right in assuming that everybody would know 12, 3, 6, 9? The old analog clock, everybody gets that, right? What I want to tell you about this is when you're going to see it, but I'm giving you a prelude, so to speak, is when we're talking about margin and padding and things like that, when you set these things, you can set them globally where you set all of them at once, or you can set them individually. If you set them all at once, you can put in 1 number, 2 numbers, 3 numbers, or 4 numbers. But let's say you put in 4 numbers. So let's just say I put in here margin. Don't worry if you can't see this that well. It's not that big a thing. I'm going to say margin 20, and I'll use pixels. 20 pixels, 10 pixels, 5 pixels, 3 pixels. I'm just making this up. There's no significance to it at all. But what I want you to understand is the first number is, it's like a clock. So it goes top, right, bottom, left. Does that make sense to you? Okay. And if I just put in 20 pixels, then it gives you 20 pixels on top, 20 pixels on the right, 20 pixels on the bottom, 20 pixels on the left. If I put in just 2 numbers, the first number will be for top and bottom, the second number will be for left and right. And padding and margin, and we're going to get into this, they work, the numbering system that I just showed you works the same for both of them. All right. So the other two things that are in here are these. I'm going to put something in right now into here. Now, I don't have this yet, so don't worry about it. I'm going to pretend I don't have that green stuff in there. Okay, it doesn't matter. We could always add that again. All right, but let's say, okay, I'm going to come in here, and I could do this. Somebody tell me what this does. What does that do?
It changes the color of H1 tag.
Yes, that change. You're right. You're right. But the key takeaway is it changes the color of every H1 tag to green. Okay? And let's just say I wanted all of my tags to be green. My H1s, my H2s, my H3s, etc. I could actually come in and do this. H1, comma, H2, comma, H3, comma, H4, comma, H5, comma, H6. Now they're all green. All right? Sometimes I don't want that. Sometimes I only want a header to be green. Okay? So I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to put this in right now. I'm going to say pound, and I'm just going to call this home main header. Now notice what I'm doing in here is I'm separating each word, and I'm using what's called camel case. All right, you don't have to do that. You could run them together if you wanted to, just regular. To me, it's a little easier to read. And then I'm going to say, after this, I'm going to come in and say, just like we did, color green. All right, and end that. Now, when I come over, and I'm going to go back again. I did have that, so I don't need that anymore. And this is my home page. If you remember, there's my Travis Trent home. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say, so I make sure I've got the right name. I'm going to say here, ID equals, again, there can only be one of these IDs on a page. So that particular heading should now be green. Now that'd be kind of hard to see because my background's green, but you get the idea, correct? And none of the rest of them would be. Now, I'm going along and everything's fine. Everything's working just fine. But now I discover later, you know what? It'd be kind of cool if that paragraph was green as well. So not only do I want that heading to be green, but I want the text for that paragraph to be green as well. Well, I can't do this. You know, the same thing we just put in before. Some people do that, and sometimes it actually works. And it may work and then stop working. So why do that? And you're right. Gabriel's right. What you want to do instead of that is instead of saying ID, you want to say class equals on both of these. Classes can appear on a page as many times as you want them or need them to appear. But in here, instead of a hashtag, I have to use a period. So IDs are for one-time shots. Now, what do I mean? Well, if I'd say, I typically, you only have one nav section on a page. Believe it or not, it's possible to have more than one navigation section on the same page. But if somebody tells you we will never, ever, ever have it on more than one on a page. I could have gone back then, and where I've got nav up here, I could have said ID equals and then given it some name. Okay? And then if we wanted to do something special with that nav bar, okay, now that would have to, if I wanted that something special I did to be on every page, every single page would have to have the ID equals some name. Does that make sense? You have to be consistent, again, if that's what you're looking for. All right?
So I have a question.
Yeah.
If we have a CSS, like let's say something targeting all H1, with all H1 tags, but then we have an ID that we're going to target one H1 tag, would the ID from...
Okay, that's a great question. So in other words, if I'm getting you right. So if we come in here and we do this. So let's say that for just, I'm making this up, but let's say for H1s, we wanted them to be purple. All right. And then we come in and we've got this. If that H1 has an ID, IDs trump classes. All right. Not only that, it's totally legit for you to sit there and for the same thing, and nav isn't a great example, so let's just go back to that H1 tag that we had. It can have both. It can have both a class and an ID. And it's even more than that. It can have multiple classes. Any element. You can do that if you want to. All right? When you start doing that, you get to a point when you look at an element and it has 8 classes associated with it that you wrote, it might be time for you to take a look at it and see, could I have written this maybe a little bit better? All right? The problem with that, and the reason stuff like that typically happens, is one person does something to start, then another person inherits it and they add something else, then another person comes in and they add something else. That's life. All right, we'll go for a couple more minutes and then we'll take a break. So again, elements by type, elements by ID, elements by class. All right? I just want to get through this section and we're going to take a break. Because this is the hardest part. This is the hardest thing about what you've done so far. And it's talking about descendant selectors, adjacent sibling selectors, child selectors, and general sibling selectors. All right? And I forget this stuff all the time. Do you ever have to use this? No. There are ways around it, but it can simplify what you're trying to do. So for instance, if you're saying, I want to change something for all unordered lists, but only if those unordered lists appear inside of a paragraph, for example. All right, that's the kind of thing. So we're starting to get more internal here. So what does this mean, descendant? This means all LIs within main. This means all A tags within a UL tag. Does that make sense? So for instance, if I had main and main had a paragraph in it, and that paragraph had an unordered list in it, and that unordered list had a list item in it, and that list item had an A tag in it, I could literally write main space P space UL space LI space A. And what you'll find is that's the way a lot of people code. Because that's, even though it's more code, you're being very specific. And you're taking total control. All right? Some people like that, some people don't. All right. Then we have, so that's a descendant. Then we have an adjacent sibling. It's something that literally is next to another element. All right? Then you've got child siblings. And it says when they're a child of a parent element. These will become important, you see, later on in the chapter. Because sometimes you only want to do, for example, maybe the first list item. So there's a thing called first child. Or maybe the last list item. There's a thing called last child. But what if I don't want to do that? What if I want every other one? You know how you get the striping on tables where every other row is a different color? There's what's called the nth child, where n is whatever number you want it to be. All right? And there's general siblings, which, as it says, siblings that are any elements that are siblings to another element. I would suggest right now not worrying about that, because there's a lot to worry about anyway. All right? And they tell you, they show you, there's examples in here on how you can code this. All right? So notice what it here. This is all unordered lists with a class of speakers. Does that make sense? ul.speakers. This is all H1, all H2, and all H3 tags. This is all P tags, all unordered lists with a class of speakers, but just the LIs in those lists. What you're going to find when we start making some changes to things like our nav bar is sometimes you've got to get what I call really granular. If you want to change something, if you want to remove, for example, the underline that we have on the website that we've created, all right, it's going to be the A tag that's got the underline. And a lot of people come in, well, it's just I'm just going to come in here and I want to remove this, so I'm just going to say, hey, for all LIs. No, it's not. It's part of the LI. It's not the LI itself. All right. I would suggest, though, these 6 or so pages, read through them. All right. Then they talk about pseudo class and pseudo element selectors. If you've never heard the term, pseudo basically means false. All right. And when you look in here, please look up on the screen here. They talk about link, visited, active, hover, and focus. See that? I believe that if you're going to use all of these, they should be used in the order that they're shown. Because if you change the order, one might overwrite the other one. So if you put them in your CSS and you're going to use all of them, I think that's the right order. Link, you all know what that is. That's a blue tag. You haven't clicked on it yet. Visited, that's purple. You know what that is. You have clicked on it. All right. Active. Notice what it says. The mouse is down on it, but you haven't released it yet. Usually the 3 that are used the most often are link, visited, and hover. You may or may not have noticed this. If I go out to Travis's real site, watch what happens when I take my mouse and put it on the tour tag. That's hover. Once I get out, it goes back again. All right? And as I mentioned before, there's first child, there's last child. I never even used only child, but there's also an nth child. First letter, first line, etc. There's a lot more than these. You can go look online. In fact, if you look in that tutorial that I showed you, they'll show you scores of these things. All right? And there's all sorts of things that you can do with them. All right, this is a good place to stop, so we will stop right here. I've got 9:02, 9:03. So let's come back, please, at 9:15.